So we're really pleased to have these three gentlemen present today. Dan Sonneson is the director of the Language Center in CLA, and he was the PI on the PACE project that just wrapped up at the end of this past academic year. Tripp Strawbridge is a graduate student in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese Studies, getting a PhD in Hispanic linguistics. And Carter Griffith is the data specialist on the PACE project working in the CLA Language Center. And today they're going to talk about impact of high school study on post-secondary foreign language proficiency. So please welcome our presenters.
Thanks, Kate. Kate's already expressed shock and awe that we have 37 slides. So we're going to try to race through these a little bit. Just to kind of set the context for this is a part of a grant that was funded by the National Security Education Program, their Language Flagship Proficiency Initiative. And Tripp's participation in this project was funded by a Carla graduate assistance, research assistant grant this past summer. We're going to talk a little bit about the project description. We're going to talk about the context in which we're looking at the data today. We're going to present the methodology that we've been working with, the results, a little bit of discussion, and some implications and conclusions. That's the outline. So the PACE project stands for Proficiency Assessment for Curricular Enhancement, and it was a 3-year grant to assess language proficiency in 3 modalities. We were working with 5 language programs funded by the Language Flagship and 2 programs funded by the College of Liberal Arts. We did assessments in 3 modalities, oral proficiency, so speaking proficiency, listening proficiency, and reading proficiency. Included also self-assessments in each of those 3 modalities, as well as a background survey talking about previous experience with the language, some motivation, why are you learning the language, what do you intend to use it for, and so on. And we also had some data that we culled from PeopleSoft. We did a total of about 2,300 assessments in these 7 languages over the 3-year period, and we targeted particularly the end of each year of the curriculum. So you can see up here that year 1 means the end of 2nd semester, and year 3 the equivalent of the end of 6th semester. We did some study abroad students, and we had some students that volunteered to be tested. And then, again, as I say, a total of about 2,300 tests. Some students tested more than once, so we had about 2,100 students total. The research questions that kind of motivated the grant project were which levels of proficiency do students demonstrate at which course levels in each language, and do students improve as they go through the curriculum? In other words, our score is higher the higher they are in the curriculum. And also, is there a relationship between students' proficiency ratings and several factors? And the 2 factors we're going to be looking at today are previous language study and post-secondary entry level. Where did they start in our program? Was kind of motivated by, we looked at French, German, and Spanish results at the end of the 4th semester, and kind of broke them down by where students entered our curriculum. So we have students entering the curriculum in 1st semester, so 1001, those entering the 2nd semester, those in 3rd, and those in 4th. And they're all tested at the end of 1004, so at the same place in the curriculum. And it kind of became clear to us that the later you started in the curriculum, the stronger your proficiency was. Particularly, this is reading. So we have already, at the end of 4th semester, over 50% of students who entered in 4th semester testing an advanced low level in reading. Speaking is somewhat similar, so that the percentage of each group is larger, higher ratings are larger as they enter the program later, and listening is similar. The proportions are quite a bit different depending on the modality. So what we wanted to look at were answering the first 2 questions. What levels do students test at? there are some studies out there that identify what might be achievable by students who are in foreign language programs. Elvira Swender did a study in 2003 of 501 majors and discovered that 47% of them were at advanced low or above. The largest group was intermediate high with about 35%. Also, it's fairly clear, and it is reflected. You'll see it's reflected in our data that listening lags behind reading, especially at lower levels. Erwin Tuna did a study, partially using some of our data about 2 years ago, that indicated that advanced low in reading is attainable within a post-secondary curriculum. As far as the length of learning experience goes, there was a study a couple of years ago of elementary school students where they determined that students who started early, that is to say in kindergarten, learning Spanish, outperformed those students who started later, again at the same point in the curriculum, so that the length of study or the length of exposure to the language had a positive effect on students' proficiency. Also, that early age starters, those who start early in middle school, tend to be more motivated and proficient than those who started in high school. And finally, what do we expect of students coming out of high school programs? A recent study also showed that the more or less expectation of students coming out of high schools, and most of these studies have to do with oral proficiency as well. Oral proficiency is around the novice high level. So our research questions are, what is the correlation between language experience and exposure in high school and post-secondary proficiency? And question 2, what's the correlation between level of post-secondary entry into a language program and proficiency? They're not necessarily the same. So our participants, we had 1,200 students. We're looking today only at Spanish and French. And we did the testing, the actual testing and oral proficiency, the OPI, which was the oral proficiency interview with computer, the reading proficiency test, and the listening proficiency test. All 3 of them available through Language Testing International, which is ACTFL's vendor for the tests. We did, as I said, we had a background language study, and one of the issues we had was that survey changed from year to year, so we asked students what their high school experience was, and in year 1 of our project, these were the alternatives: 1 less than a year, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 5, and 5 plus. We modified that somewhat in the second year, and now they're answering one of those 4 in the middle column. And finally, in the third year, in order to have parity with the other 2 institutions that were doing this proficiency initiative, that's University of Utah and Michigan State University, we all agreed to have them check each year from kindergarten through 12th grade that they had studied the language. So that's a much more differentiated report. And finally, we also got information on previous coursework, which determined where they entered our curriculum. We got that from PeopleSoft. Chip, I think this is you, right?
Sure, yeah. All right, so Connor and I, spoiler alert. So Connor and I are going to go over some of the results, first looking at what students were achieving just overall as they progressed through the course levels, through the language programs for French and Spanish, and then looking at the effects of their high school experience and their placement into the program when they start here. These are the participants, kind of out of the big group that we're working with here, and these are just the main course groupings that were collected for each language. So we've got 2nd, 4th, and 6th semesters. Obviously, we have more for Spanish than for French. And then upper division, which is for French, 3,100 through the major. So it's kind of a wider collection. And then for Spanish, the upper division students that we're looking at least beyond the sixth semester are those enrolled in their Spanish major capstone course. And then, just to give you a sense of what the numbers mean, we try to, throughout the slides, put in the kind of translations into the actual levels. But, just from novice low to superior, they'll have their number equivalents, which you'll also see in the slide. So 1 through 3 being novice low through novice high, 4, 5, and 6 being the MB8 levels, and 7, 8, 9 advanced. So we'll first just look at kind of overall what they're achieving. You may have seen this, in other presentations, but just to give you an idea, for Spanish, first, obviously we see a clear progression of higher mean proficiency scores as students advance through the coursework, right? So starting semester 2, then 4, 6, and capstone. Listening lags initially by quite a bit for the semester 2 group. It's over an entire sublevel below what we're seeing for reading and speaking. And then, we see a big jump for this, which maybe is easier to see down here in the graph, between semester 4 and 6, especially, where listening kind of makes that leap and overtakes speaking. Speaking is kind of a more modest slope. And then finally, when we reach, the upper division, the capstone students, reading's still highest, followed by listening and then speaking. You can kind of see how much difference there is there between those three modalities. For French, we see some similarity in that listening, again, lags initially, right? It's the lowest out of the three modalities, not quite to the same extent that we saw for Spanish. But again, we see it kind of make a jump listening between semesters 4 and 6, where for the semester 6 group it overtakes speaking mean proficiencies, and then kind of dips back down for the upper division students. But they're pretty close. So across the three modalities for French, we see a little bit closer of a relationship for those enrolled in upper division courses. And again, with a more modest progression for speaking. So we're going to get into technology. We're going to get into kind of the effects of high school experience and placement into the program. And then what we decided to do for this, just so as not to keep you here all afternoon, just 37 slides of it, we want to look at one group from each course level. So we chose a Spanish Chem 4 to show you what's happening at fourth semester for the effects of these variables, and then for sixth semester for French, and finally for upper division students Spanish capstone. Our hope is just that this kind of gives you an idea of what's happening in the group as a whole. By looking at these four groups, and semesters 4, 6, and upper division, which are kind of the ones that we're most interested in seeing the effects of high school and placement, as opposed to the second semester. So we're going to go through these, and then as we look, we'll look at each course level at a time for the two variables, and then also Carter's going to talk a little bit in each case about what the makeup of these course levels is. So for 4th, 6th, and upper division course levels, what students typically have as far as high school experience and placement into the program.
So here we're looking at, again, we're not talking about their proficiencies here, we're looking at the populations of fourth semester Spanish. So we got all the semesters for the base project. This is a breakdown of fourth semester Spanish. Over here on the left, we have broken down by high school experience. You can see that 3 to 5, the red, that's the main chunk. So 45% of people in Spanish Channel 4 have had 3 to 5 high school years. Another 24% have over 5. So you're looking at, what do we say, 69% with 3 or more years. And then the remaining 31 with 0 to 3 years. And then we see a similar distribution for where they placed, where they started. So we can see 61% of them started in the third semester or a fourth semester. So third semester or higher. And here's your big chunk of they started the curriculum in Spanish 1022, second semester. And it's my understanding there's 3% because it requires special permission to start in the first semester of Spanish. So that's one contributing factor why there's so few that started in time. So again, this is who the students are by the two characteristics we're looking at today.
So as far as the effect that these students' high school experience has for semester 4, we see, the basic picture is that we see higher proficiency scores for students as they report more high school experience. And what kind of jumped out to us was that there seemed to be a cutoff, and this is true for French too, between students who had 3 or more years of high school experience coming into their university study, or 0 to 2 years, right? So that appears to be where we see a more noticeable contrast. There's not as much of a contrast between students that have either 3 to 5 years or 5+ years. That doesn't seem to make as much of a difference, but there does seem to be kind of a clear difference between students who come in with at least 3 years of experience and those who come in with right? And again, these students are all they're all at the same course level here, so they're all enrolled in Spanish 4 in a fourth semester course, but we're just seeing the effect of what they have had previously for high school. This contrast is biggest in the case of reading, so it's over an entire sublevel difference, mean difference for students who have had either 0 to 2 years of high school as opposed to 5 years and above, and that's a significant contrast with a large effect size, 0.93. For listening, it's a little bit less, right? But it's still 0.69 in the sublevel for the difference between those two groups, those who have the least or most amount of high school experience. Again, that contrast is significant with a large effect size. And we see that it's least for speaking, a little bit more modest, right? And it might be easier to see just visually on the graph what that progression is looking like and how much of a difference there is for students, especially that cutoff between either 0 to 2 years of high school experience versus 3. When we look at the effect of placement into the program, so what their first course at Minnesota has been, the first university Spanish course, we see a similar trend in that students who place higher originally into the program, maintain higher mean proficiency scores than those who are in the same course level who have started earlier in the program, who have started second and third semester. And this is uniform across all modalities and each contrast between courses, just meaning that all the semester 4 courses, that is students who have entered at semester 4, are higher than all mean scores for students who have entered at semester 3, which are in turn then higher for all the mean scores for students who have entered at second semester. As in the case for high school, this contrast is largest for, sorry, I skipped over, let's say, well, that's all right. But it's largest for listening, okay? So there's a 1.3 sub-level contrast between students who entered at semester 2 as opposed to semester 4, or any one full semester, which again is significant with a very large effect size. Oh, sorry, I misspoke. Reading is actually a little bit larger, right? So at 1.6 sub-level difference between semester 2 and semester 4, right? And again, these are all statistically significant contrasts with large effect sizes, even in the case of speaking, which is a more modest contrast at 0.6 between students entering second versus fourth semester. And again, it might be easier to see on the graph, right? Or even more than in the case of high school, we can see kind of a clear and consistent progression for higher scores as students enter into the program. So we'll get to French now for the 3016 group, and again we'll look at, we'll look at first kind of what the makeup of that 6th semester French group is.
So looking at the same characteristics as we did for the 4th semester Spanish, we have a whole different makeup for the 6th semester population. Again, for the years of high school experience that were self-reported, and 0 is a much smaller portion. And we look at above the red and the purple, which is 3 years and above, we've got 79% reporting of all the students tested in 2016. We have nearly 80% that report 3 years or more in high school. And then as far as placement goes, we can see that 3/4 or more have started in 3rd semester, 4th semester, or beyond. Right? So that's 3/4 of that population came here with more. They placed into higher levels. These two, they show similar trends. They're not necessarily related. That's kind of one of the things we're looking at. But as you can see, let's still look at population itself. Now we'll turn back to Trip for the results and proficiencies.
Okay. So if we look at the effect for the 6th semester French group of high school experience, we see again, as we did for Spanish 4th semester, where there appears to be a cutoff between students who have more or less than 3 years of experience, right? So scores tend to be higher for students who have at least 3 years, whether that's 3 to 5 years or 5+ years. And here in the case of listening and reading, there's not a big contrast between 3 and 5 and 5+, but it's actually, it's the group that's reporting 3 to 5 years that has higher scores in this case than 5+. So the relative contrast is not large. In the case of speaking, it's the group with 5+ years who has higher scores. The largest contrast is in the case of listening. And this is the only modality that, in this case, was statistically significant, and also with a large effect size, where we see 3/4 of a sublevel contrast between students either reporting 0 to 2 years or 3 to 5 years. For reading, it's a little bit less, right? There's about half sublevel difference, a little bit more between students reporting 0 to 3 or 3 to 5, kind of a moderate to large effect size. And similar for speaking, as far as the contrast between the group with the least or most high school experience. So obviously not quite as clear as we saw in the case for high school effect on 4th semester Spanish, but a similar trend, and we're again seeing a kind of cutoff between the students who come in to university study with either below or above 3 years of high school. We again see the trend is consistent for the effect of placement into the program. So depending on, if they started at 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 5th semester in this case, where the students who entered at 5th semester, so in French 3rd to 15, it's that group that is reporting the highest scores, the highest median scores across listening, reading, and speaking. And the note showed a significant effect for speaking and listening, but not for reading in this case. The largest contrast here is actually for speaking, where there's over an entire sublevel difference between students entering at 2nd as opposed to 5th semester. Obviously, as you can see, the numbers are low in this case for the 2nd semester group, but we do see nearly a full sublevel difference for the contrast between students entering at 3rd and 5th semesters for speaking up here. And again, that's, in this case, a significant and with large effect size. For listening, a little bit less, but we do see, and again, the numbers are low for the 2nd semester group, but almost the entire sub-level difference for students, depending on whether they entered the 2nd or 5th semester. And then now we'll get into Spanish upper division.
Again, same description of a different group of students. Looking at the Spanish 3,000 level, we've got, and here we have 86%, again, have at least 3 to 5 years self-reported high school study before they come to you. And the lower, there's the people that don't have, they have, 0 to 3, 0 to 2 years, there just aren't very many in these courses. And if we look at placement, we can see here, 90 plus % of the people of this population they've entered at least third semester. That was their first course at the U of M. So it's the population between these students and the fourth semester is drastically different. Just the makeup of the student's experience, and which we'll be talking about more in a little bit.
Yeah, so partly because of that makeup, if we look at the effect of high school. First of all, the only two groups that we had enough students to include in our analysis here were coming in with either 3 to 5 or 5 plus years, just because there's so few students. This is the last course in the Spanish major, the capstone course, because there are so few students that have under 3 years of high school experience when they come in and start the program. And so kind of unsurprisingly, given what we've been seeing for the comparisons between these two groups previously, there's not a big contrast between, the scores that they're getting by the time they reach the capstone course, at least as far as it relates to their high school experience. So the biggest, out of these, the biggest contrast is in listening, which is about a third of the sub-level difference between the two groups, kind of a low effect size. And then you can see that the scores are extremely close for reading and speaking. Right? There's virtually no difference between the groups according to high school experience. This changes when we look at the same group, but the effect of where they came into the program, so just where they placed into the program, where we're kind of seeing again this trend of students who place higher, maintaining higher mean proficiency scores. And yet we don't have any semester 2 students because there are so few of them that are enrolled in capstone courses in Spanish that start in semester 2, but we do have groups for semester 3, 4, and 5 as far as the placement goes, right? And we do see a progression, right, where in all cases students who place higher into the program have higher mean proficiency scores, right, those groups. This is largest in the case of listening, right, where we see over an entire sub-level difference for mean scores for listening, for those who entered in the 5th semester in 2015 as opposed to 3rd semester. And these are large effect sizes again. For reading, it's a little bit less, but we still see half a sub-level average difference between students who are entering 3rd as opposed to 5th semester. And again, for speaking, around that same level, 0.59 between students that are entering 3rd and 5th semester. And if you look at the graph, right, you can see kind of how regular that progression is, right? Where it's pretty clear that students are maintaining, those groups that come in, placing higher, are kind of maintaining that advantage, that average advantage proficiency-wise, over students who places in lower courses and they enter courses.
All right, so answering responding to our first research question, what is the correlation between language experience and exposure in high school and post-secondary proficiency? Well, previous high school study impacts post-secondary proficiency. It has an effect. There's a clear division in all modalities between students with 3+ years and those with less high school experience. That seems to be a cutoff. So 3+, or what we find if we look at the differentiated data, particularly from that 3rd year when we asked what years did you study in high school, 4 was a really sweet number. 4 years of high school tended to be exactly what we were looking for. And unfortunately, we never asked them, did you study 4 years in the previous 2 years? But we're estimating that 4 is really that sweet spot. And what's really interesting here, too, is that those with more than 5 years, that doesn't seem to make any difference.
Yeah, it's weird.
Doesn't seem to make any difference. Second question, what's the correlation between the level of post-secondary entry into a language program and proficiency? Well, the entry level does impact post-secondary proficiency. Students who enter post-secondary study with higher proficiency levels also exit with higher proficiency levels relative to other students. And that was clear from that last slide that Tripp showed us. There doesn't seem to be a leveling that's happening in the upper division. It's not like everyone's coming together. It's that division stays all the way along. So there are these clear divisions in all modalities among the students on the first course, based on the first course they took here. And this seems to be a larger or more salient factor than high school study has. So we thought we would just take a look again at the makeup of students. So depending on how many years in high school they studied, and this is now the entire population of our 2,300 students, or 2,100 students that we tested. So in Spanish, and this includes Spanish students that were tested in 1022 and 1002, 1004, 3105, and then the capstone. 10%, the blues, 10% had less than 1 year. 13 at 1 to 2 years. 8% at up to 3 years, and then the largest, the lion's share still is 70%, 3 years or more. In French, it's a little bit more differentiated, so there's less, there are more students who had no high school experience. But again, well over 50% of them had more than 3 years. And that's the whole French population that we studied. German is slightly different. That blue segment tends to grow at 32%, no experience in high school prior to attending and enrolling in German. And so we have less than 50% have had 3 years of high school or more. Again, this is across the curriculum in German. What's it like in the other 4 languages? Arabic, Korean, Portuguese, and Russian. Surprise. What does that tell us? It seems to me this is very reflective of what's offered in high schools, right? I mean, we just don't have these less commonly taught languages offered nearly as much in high schools as we do the others. So what are the implications? One is that if you focus on proficiency in high school, that will get you placed higher, and that will get you more success in terms of proficiency development at this post-secondary level. Sorry, I have to go back here. Students need more opportunities to do 4 years of language study in more languages. And it may be important to foster and strengthen relationships between schools and post-secondary institutions, especially for recruitment purposes. There's a connection there. They start in high school with us. What would things look like? Here's a French class, 2016. This is the average makeup of a French class in our database. 16 students. And if we took away students who had had more than 3 years of high school experience, look how large that class would be. Same thing in Spanish. They have more who've studied longer than 5 years. But take away those 2 populations, and you've got a Spanish upper division class populated by 3 students.
You wouldn't be offering that course.
You wouldn't be offering that course, or you wouldn't be offering the same amount of sections of that course. Right? I mean, so what are the implications for us? We are strongly dependent on high school programs for majors and minors. We wouldn't have them without the high school experience. We may need to rethink placement policies, looking at the makeup of a fourth semester Spanish class. Do these all belong in the same class? We may need to look at differentiated learning. How do we address those different populations in the same class? And we may need to pay attention to speaking opportunities targeted at the advanced level. If you think back to the Spanish 1004, the speaking wasn't necessarily stronger. Not anything like the comparison between reading. So speaking is something that maybe that we're not challenging this group of students enough on. So concluding, 3 to 5 years of formal language learning with proficiency focus, leading to placement in third semester or higher. And that seems to be significant, third semester or higher. Provide a solid base to continue developing proficiency and forms the pool of students to recruit into higher levels of the curriculum. The stronger the proficiency level at the entry into post-secondary curricular sequence, the stronger the proficiency level going forward.
So we have this mountain of data, and today we looked at 2 languages and 2 characteristics, and we only came up with 37 slides. So we're saying we have 7 languages, and over 25, depending on how you count, 25 different characteristics of these learners, whether it's from the registrar or a self-reported survey. So we're just scratching the surface of what can be learned from this stuff, and we just want to invite you to join the conversation. We can't ask the question. We can't answer the questions until we ask them. So help us come up with some questions.
And finally, our thank you to Carla for the support for the research that we did this summer, for putting on this presentation hour today. The Language Flagship that funded all of the testing that we did. College of Liberal Arts that funded the testing that the Language Flagship didn't. And the CLA language departments and instructors, all of whom were involved with the preparation and the proposal for the grant. And again, we couldn't have done any of this stuff without you guys to collect it. So thank you. Hey, 10 minutes, huh?
A couple of comments.
Yeah.
First of all, I really like the graphic of French 3016 with the dots, because that's what I'm teaching. And I agree with that graphic, because I have a couple of kids who have been in French since immersion school, and I have some who just came back from study abroad, so that was a really good representation of the variety that you get in there. And then the idea of language differentiation, even at the advanced levels, is really important. I mean, even 3015, 3016 that I've taught for a long time, the levels are very, very varied according to what you said, how much they've had before. And also, you were saying, I'm really glad you said this about the importance of realizing if we don't recruit high school kids and we don't reach out to high schools, we're not going to have, we're going to not have majors and minors, because I work with the College in the Schools program. And I do have a question, which is there any way to study whether the kids who do college in the schools end up testing into higher levels than the kids who do regular? Because you didn't get that data. You didn't get the data. When you said high school study, you didn't ask them, did you take college in the schools? You just asked them, did you take French or Spanish?
We did not. And my understanding is that college in the schools, if you completed that, you're in semester.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
There would be a way to get at that data. I don't know how many students there would be in it, but you'd have to look at something specific like the section number.
Right.
I think would probably be because they
Of the
have
college and the schools
right because
thing,
they all have like a higher one.
Right.
Because on the surface, a student who took 1004 college in the schools, their transcript looked exactly the same as a student who took it here.
Yeah.
So yeah. I don't know that we've ever looked at it, and I don't know how many students are in that population, but you'd have to look at either the subject or I'm sure the section would be the easiest way to get at it.
Right. But the other thing that I found kind of sad was the kids who had 5 years of high school Spanish, and they still only tested into 104. I find that kind of sad. Well, just because my son, who takes Spanish because he just wants to make me angry, he doesn't take French. He's in Spanish 5 now. And I'm wondering, I just find that kind of sad that that these kids who have taken 5 years can't test into 3015.
If you go back to that study that was done,
Yeah.
I think they had about 6,000 high
Yeah.
school tests. They tested using the STAMP assessment tool.
Mhm.
4 years of high school bring you up to novice high.
Okay. I just find that sad. That's the only reason I'm saying it.
That's okay.
Yeah, so I had a question about that. That study, is that the study you talked about expectations for oral proficiency? Or was it actual measures of oral proficiency for that one study, the Swender and?
It was actual measurements.
Okay, so this is in contrast with your data though, right? So the data that you guys showed today, the OPIC results for students who placed into the whatever, it didn't matter what course, they were all above novice high.
At the end of 4th semester post-secondary education, yeah.
But so even if they placed into 1004, say after 4 years of high school, that was in contrast to what the other study. There seems to be a discrepancy between that study
There
and
does.
what you're reporting.
And we don't know what proficiency level they had when they came in.
Right, but they wouldn't have gone from novice high to intermediate high, probably. in one
Probably
semester.
not. We have a placement tool, so that we have it's called the
EPT?
Entrance
proficiency
proficiency test.
Right.
And what that does is it assesses students' listening, reading, and writing, not speaking.
Yeah, there's no speaking.
And again, the Swender piece was only oral proficiency. And I'm thinking what I pulled out of the Miller piece was
Well, that's
also,
the one I'm thinking of.
yeah, was also oral proficiency. It was I focused on that. I go back and look at it, but I think it's very similar. There really hasn't been a lot done with reading, but reading and writing, reading and listening.
No, I'm talking specifically about speaking, though.
Yeah. Well, again, at the end of, let me see if I can go back to this. 37 slides worth. Give it a try. So, Spanish 1004, we're still at those that placed into it are at intermediate mid. So they're not at intermediate high.
Yeah, but they're also not, they couldn't have started at novice high and ended up at intermediate mid.
No,
I think that's unlikely.
that's unlikely.
Yeah.
That's unlikely. But those that started in, I mean, they're all the average, even with those that started in 1002, 1022, is still intermediate level. So it's pretty firmly in the intermediate level. Again, we're talking about nationally. That's the way it is. Maybe we can pat ourselves on the back as far as Minnesota is concerned, and Minnesota students get to a higher level of proficiency. I don't know.
And our scores were higher than the Turner study too.
Our scores, yeah. I mean, basically, if we look at the Turner study of I think 3,000 or so tests, and he was only looking at listening and reading, but our scores were consistently higher than his.
This type of graph here where you're showing the difference between students that started in 1004 and those that started in 1002 at the U. Anyway, my point is, I don't see those as being that far. If the difference is between intermediate high and intermediate mid, is where they're ending up, I don't see that that's a really big difference. And I'm wondering if in other languages there was a greater discrepancy.
Are you talking about Oral proficiency?
Any of these. So I mean, I'm anticipating that in German there would be a greater range between the green and the red. I was wondering if you've done that for the other languages.
Well, we did it for French, and it was
Yeah.
very similar.
And it was even closer. I mean, that was what I know. On
Yeah.
French, it
I
was
know
even
it's
closer.
enough.
The red and the green.
Well, again,
was
the
a
French
different
was
level.
316 in different levels.
Okay.
So 1004, I think the results are fairly similar to Spanish.
Okay. Yeah.
And there is, here's the interesting thing for me, is that the oral proficiency, and that's where the recommendation comes, maybe this group needs to be challenged more. Because here's where leveling seems to happen, right? It's the oral part. This is really tough, right? The listening, and then the reading is also, we're talking about well over a sub-level difference. And this,
Oh, with a huge effect size.
I would say too, within the range of what are possible or likely scores for fourth semester students, I think it's a pretty big contrast, right? I mean, because they're only going to be basically somewhere between not as high, most likely not as high, intermediate high in some cases, advanced low maybe for reading. I don't know. I think 1.5 sub-levels, just in that context, where it's only fourth semester, it's only a difference of whether they come in second, third, and fourth. The contrast can only theoretically be so large, right? I mean, you're never going to have a 3 sub-level difference. So as far as what you really could expect and how much of a difference it could make, I think for this group for fourth semester, it's pretty big. Even though it might not look just visually like a huge difference when you see it on there, I think it's about as large as we could really kind of predict.
That's assuming that.
But I know what you mean, that it doesn't
that your greens
shocking
are
to
doing
see.
that well. If your greens don't do that well in catching up, I mean, if
Sure. I mean, I would just say too, or just remind you that, I mean, these students are all currently enrolled in the same exact course level. So I mean, in theory, I mean, the idea, according to how the program is structured, is that they'll be at the same, about the same proficiency level.
yeah, again, I think the speaking part, they're much closer together, but not on the other parts.
Is there any way, did you keep track of how many years people didn't take language? Like, say I took junior high, I took 2 years, I took freshman and sophomore French, and then I didn't have any junior or senior year. So did you take the gaps into account?
We did, we looked at that. Go ahead.
For the data we have here, we have that differentiation for spring of 2017. We don't have it for the whole project, so we interpreted the spring 17 data into the same terms as the rest of the semesters. So for the purpose of this, we did not take the gap into account, just high school and middle school study.
And there weren't, just again eyeballing it, there just weren't a lot. I mean, most of them, if they dropped off, it was after their junior year in high school. But most of them continued through senior year.
And again, just eyeballing the differentiated 2017 data, the 9 through 12 it seemed to be the most common group of 4 years. That block seemed to be indicative of all of these things we're talking about. I mean,
Like the U.S. students have 4 consecutive years of language. They favor that when you apply. So that would make sense. That they would take 9.
All right, you had a question.
Not a question, but I was just thinking that on a graph like this, it might be interesting to see it as a box and whisker plot, just to be able to see the range more.
see the outliers.
That's what I'm curious about.
Okay.
And I think that kind of
That's-
is the
that's-
best question.
yeah.
It's really hard to do.
I can imagine.
No, but what we don't have really differentiated data. It's,
Oh, okay,
it's,
so-
you know, it's this level, this level, this level.
Right.
And to kind of tease that out is really hard.
Okay,
If it was a continuous thing, we're just comparing groups.
yeah.
It's not continuous, unfortunately. We certainly thought about that. There are, speaking about outliers, there were some. I mean, there were some students that, I'd love to know who this French student is, who started in 1001, no high school experience whatsoever, and is advanced low or above in 3 modalities. No study abroad.
Wow.
But, you know, that's an outlier, and you can't really do much with that other than say, wow, let's find out what her secret is or his secret is. Yeah.
So I wondered if, 2 questions. The first is, there's folks that take the LPE, and so I wonder if that would change the data at all. Like if, because you obviously aren't including those in the 1004, because if they passed it and reached that proficiency, right, then they wouldn't be included in this data, and I wonder if you have a sense if that would change. It's probably a relatively small group of people that are passing out of 1004, but I didn't know if you thought that, or if you have a sense that if that might skew it more or not.
I don't know.
Well, in the case of Spanish, if they started off higher than 1004, they passed the LPE.
No, I'm thinking more about people who are in 1003, take the LPE, pass it, and then they are not being included in this, and their proficiency would have been high, and they started in, maybe even, like I have a student who started in 1022, took the LPE screening, right, passed it, I don't know if he'll pass the other, but I think I have a strong inclination he will, so that he wouldn't be, people like him would not be included.
Well, and they're also terminal. I mean, essentially, the reason you do that is because you're completing the requirement and you're not interested in continuing.
Right. And yet your proficiency is...
Right. If you, students who follow that route, they're done. They're not eligible to take the 4th semester course, and they don't. I mean, they're done.
Just one more comment, and then we're out of time. But the first year of this grant, the 3 institutions do collaborative presentations all the time. And the first year, Fernando Rubio out of Utah showed the results of the proficiency testing, and it was great because there was all this progression, and the students were getting very high proficiency. And then he says, well, remember where we are. We're in Utah. And we have a number of students that have just returned from 2 years in a foreign country, speaking a language, and let's take them out of the mix. And by taking them out of the mix, the results just plummeted. And it seems to me, and we didn't do this, but it seems to me that if we take the students who have had 4 years of high school and more out of our mix, our scores will go lower too. I mean, that's how dependent we are on previous language exposure. Thanks, I guess we're out of time. Thank you all.